There's a company a U.S. senator accused, on the floor of Congress, of corrupting an entire generation. A company Congress formally investigated, that was dragged to court by families across the country, and that spent years in the news not for its products, but for its lawsuits. And that same company owns the most profitable entertainment franchise in history. Not a movie, not a series, a video game. What almost nobody talks about is that the scandal didn't slow Rockstar Games down. Without fully planning it, it became the engine that finished building their empire. The story starts in London, in the mid-90s, with two brothers who had no idea how to make a video game. Sam Hauser and Dan Hauser worked at BMG Interactive, the games division of a German record label, and neither of them came from the world of development. Sam had come up through BMG's promotions department and music video direction. Dan had graduated with a geography degree from Oxford. What they did have was a good eye for spotting potential, and they found it in a Scottish studio called DMA Design, which was building a car theft game with a simple, chaotic premise. Move freely through a city, break the law, and let the game not tell you how to do it. It was called Grand Theft Auto. BMG Interactive published that first installment in 1997, and even though it couldn't compete graphically with anything dominating the market at the time, the industry was obsessed with finding the next Tomb Raider. It produced something strange, an obsessive fan base and a wave of negative press over its violence that, even if nobody would admit it yet, was already working as free publicity. Sam Hauser would say it himself years later in an interview. The game wasn't as polished graphically, but it was deeply immersive. It put you into a world and gave you choices. That line, without anyone realizing it yet, would end up becoming the founding philosophy of the entire company about to be born. But the business behind that gem was going under. In 1998, Take-Two Interactive bought BMG Interactive's assets, including the rights to Grand Theft Auto, in exchange for nearly 2 million shares of the company. Sam and Dan Hauser, along with Terry Donovan, Gary Foreman, and Jamie King, moved to New York with the deal in hand, and that same December founded their own label inside Take-Two, Rockstar Games. The name, according to those who were there, came out of a casual conversation about Sam Hauser's obsession with 70s and 80s rock. The stated inspiration for the tone of their stories was never the video game industry, but mob and gangster cinema, Scorsese, Coppola, translated into a controller. Take-Two provided the money and the corporate structure. The Hausers provided the creative vision and an extremely high tolerance for reputational risk. That combination, traditional financing plus creatives willing to make people uncomfortable, would end up becoming the company's exact formula. And with it, they launched their first titles under the new label, like Smugglers Run and Midnight Club, before the real explosion arrived. The real leap came in 2001 with Grand Theft Auto 3, the first fully 3D open-world title in the series. It wasn't just a successful game, it redefined what a video game could be and gave the entire industry a new category to aspire to. Rockstar understood something its competitors would take years to copy: narrative freedom. Letting the player choose to be the villain, and doing it without apologizing for it, built a brand loyalty no other studio was achieving. 3 years later, in 2004, came Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, set in a fictional state inspired by California, with a much sharper social commentary on race, gangs, and urban inequality in the United States. San Andreas would go on to sell more than 27.5 million copies, an absolute record for the series at that point, and it broke UK sales records the moment it launched. The business was at its peak. Take-Two was growing, Rockstar was cementing itself as the crown jewel of its catalog, and the trade press was calling them the boldest storytellers in the industry. But while the numbers climbed, something else was piling up in parallel: the first lawsuits. Parent groups, activists, and some local politicians were already pointing at the series over its violent content, and several families had filed legal action blaming Grand Theft Auto for influencing teenage behavior, especially after cases of youth violence where the defense or the press mentioned the game as an alleged contributing factor. Rockstar responded with the same formula as always: public silence, more production, and an even bigger title the following year. That pattern, ignore the controversy and let sales do the talking, had worked perfectly for almost a decade. Rockstar was still selling like never before, sure, but the storm coming wasn't going to be just another isolated lawsuit, the kind they already knew how to absorb. It was going to be something that pulled in the United States Congress directly and would test whether that formula of silence and indifference still held up. In June 2005, a Dutch modder named Patrick Wildenborg released a small PC patch that unlocked something already sitting, dormant, inside the San Andreas disk. A sexual minigame between protagonist CJ and his girlfriends, which Rockstar had disabled before launch, but had never actually removed from the code. The community named it Hot Coffee, after the line the game's girlfriends used to invite CJ in for some coffee, right before the camera cut away. The content wasn't new. It had been sitting there since 2004, hidden, waiting for someone to find it. And when they found it, the reaction was disproportionate to the content itself, but devastating for Rockstar. In July 2005, Senator Hillary Clinton formally wrote to the Federal Trade Commission demanding an investigation and pressured the video game rating system, the ESRB, calling it inadequate. That same month, Congressman Fred Upton introduced a resolution in the House of Representatives to determine whether Rockstar had deliberately deceived the ESRB to avoid an adults-only rating. The resolution passed 355 to 21. The ESRB stripped San Andreas of its M rating and reclassified it as adults only, the only time that's ever happened to a mainline title in the series. Rockstar initially tried to claim the content was the work of outside hackers, a story that fell apart quickly once it became clear the code had shipped built into the game from the start. The consequences were expensive and concrete. Several retail chains pulled the game from shelves. Take-Two had to recall and replace millions of copies, a process that cost more than $24 million. The Federal Trade Commission's investigation concluded, in June 2006, that Rockstar should have disclosed the content to the ESRB before launch. Consumer lawsuits were consolidated into a class action that was eventually settled for $20 million, with refunds of up to $35 for anyone who had bought the original, unpatched edition of the game. And in the middle of all that noise, a figure emerged who would become inseparable from the story: Jack Thompson, a Florida attorney and anti-video game activist who had spent years targeting Rockstar as a public enemy, long before Hot Coffee ever existed. Thompson had unsuccessfully sued to block the release of another one of the company's titles, Bully, arguing before a judge that it posed a public risk, and succeeded only in forcing Take-Two to hand over a copy for his review before it hit shelves. With Hot Coffee as his biggest ammunition yet, Thompson became the media face of the crusade against Rockstar for years, appearing on television, pressuring prosecutors, and threatening lawsuits against anyone who publicly contradicted him. The ironic twist is that while Rockstar managed to absorb the hit, rework its relationship with regulators, and keep operating normally, Thompson's own legal career was collapsing under its own weight. In September 2008, the Florida Supreme Court permanently disbarred him after proceedings that documented more than 20 violations of bar rules, including making false statements to courts and a pattern of conduct the judge herself described as designed to inflict maximum harm on whoever he considered an enemy. The loudest critic ended up expelled from his own profession before the company he was chasing ever stopped existing. In fact, while Thompson was losing his license for good, Rockstar was already working on its next big bet. What Rockstar did after Hot Coffee wasn't retreat or soften its identity. They released a second edition of San Andreas without the problematic code, adjusted their internal rating processes, and kept building worlds that were increasingly ambitious and increasingly provocative. In 2008 came Grand Theft Auto 4, which sold around 25 million copies with a darker, more adult narrative than any previous entry. But the real turning point came in 2013 with Grand Theft Auto 5. GTA 5 didn't just become the best-selling game of the decade by both unit and dollar sales in the United States, it generated over $800 million in its first 24 hours and passed $1 billion in just 3 days, a speed no entertainment product, including movies, had ever reached before. And that number never stopped climbing. As of this recording, according to Take-Two's latest financial reports, GTA 5 has surpassed 225 million copies sold worldwide, is still moving around 5 million units per quarter more than a decade after its original release, and has generated an estimated $10 billion in cumulative revenue. The entire Grand Theft Auto franchise, adding up every entry, has surpassed 465 million copies sold across its history. A big part of that sustained revenue doesn't come just from the initial disc sale, but from GTA Online, the multiplayer mode Rockstar kept updating for more than a decade, turning a game released in 2013 into a recurring revenue stream that, in practice, funded more than 10 years of the entire company's operations without needing to release a new mainline entry. That patience, uncommon in an industry used to pushing out sequels every 2 or 3 years, is the same patience that now has millions of players waiting. There's more to that recovery, and to similar cases that never make it to the channel because they're too murky to tell here, over on my mailing list. And now all that player base, that reputation built on scandal and creative discipline, is riding on Grand Theft Auto 6, whose trailer racked up more than 475 million views within days, and which, after 2 consecutive delays, Rockstar now has scheduled to finally release on November 19th, 2026. The company the United States Congress once wanted to formally investigate for corrupting young people is, today, the one single-handedly holding up a huge share of its parent company's market value, Take-Two Interactive, and the one that has the entire entertainment industry, not just gaming, waiting on a single date on the calendar. The lesson Rockstar leaves behind isn't that all controversy is good publicity, that reading is too easy, and most of the time, false. The real lesson is more uncomfortable. A well-managed controversy, backed by a product that actually delivers on its promise, can end up woven into a brand's mythology instead of destroying it. Rockstar never apologized for its tone. They adjusted processes, paid what they had to pay, and kept betting on the same provocation that had gotten them in trouble in the first place, because that provocation was, in the end, the product. The question left hanging for any company going through a scandal like this isn't whether it's going to survive the controversy. It's whether, once the storm passes, it's still going to have something good enough that nobody cares what got said about it in Congress. I save the most controversial cases for my mailing list, not for the channel. And this one, congressional hearings included, is exactly the kind of story I tell in full over there.